explore everything you need to become the best possible version of you. This is Sandee Sgarlata, and today I've got some exciting news for our dedicated listeners. We've just launched our exclusive members only portal. This is your ticket to a world of additional content designed to deepen your understanding and engagement with the Happiness Solved mission. To learn more about all of the exciting benefits, stay tuned until the end of the episode where I will explain in greater detail. For those interested now, head over to happinesssolved.supercast.com. Today is another amazing conversation, so let's get started. Jonathan Raymond, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a pleasure to be meeting you, and I can't wait to delve in and hear all about your story.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So you've been a leadership coach for over 20 years, and you have experience working with executives across diverse industries, and you have a book that's called The Good Authority. It's just Good Authority. Sorry, I misread that. And so before we dive into that, I always love to hear people's stories and what got them to where they are today, because we all have that pivotal moment in our life where, we shift gears, and sometimes it's over a period of time. Sometimes it's a light bulb that just kind of goes on. What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, for me, it was kind of a 1-2 punch. I would say the first of those two moments was when I was around 18 or 19, was sophomore year in college, and I'm 51 now, so it was a little while ago. But it really was the culmination of being a pretty unhappy kid. Like normal, the normal stuff, but just I was just really depressed and lonely, and just didn't know who I was in the world, and felt like I had some good friends, but I wasn't able to kind of build deeper relationships. And I just had this sinking feeling that I wasn't who I was supposed to be, I guess is the best way I could say it. And so that led me down a pathway of really on the personal growth and spiritual development side, where I got really interested in meditation and psychedelics. And at the time, a lot of things that are legal now, which were not legal then, or at least under medical supervision, legal now. And I just got really interested in my own psychology and my own emotion and kind of the depths of my own experience. And that journey kind of went on for, the next 15, 20 years, where I got really interested in, all things Eastern, esoteric, somatic psychotherapy, counseling, movement practice, you name it. I've said to people, like, if there's some kooky out there thing to like experiment on yourself, I probably tried it.
Sounds like me.
Yeah, and I can share with you the pros and cons of that activity. But so that was kind of the first one, was like, okay, it sort of set me down this authenticity path, with a lot of bumps and bruises along the way. And then the second was I was a CEO of a business coaching company. This was back in the early 2010s. And I really kind of hit my limit as a leader, as an executive. And I felt like I was kind of in like two swimming pools at the same time, and it wasn't working. I was like still working on my own personal growth and my own self-development, kind of with half of my body and being. And then the other half was like working on being a business leader and being successful and making money and all those things. And I was really split between the two. And it just came to a head where my world was essentially collapsing around me. And, I can laugh about it now, but it wasn't funny at the time. And, the business was suffering, my finances were suffering, my health was suffering, my marriage was suffering, everything, I was lost again. And I thought to myself, like, how can this possibly be? I've been working on myself for 20 years. How can I be still so stuck? And I was in that moment, that was kind of the second of that 1-2, where I realized, with a lot of help from my wife, that I had been pursuing those two things as separate journeys, personal and professional growth. And she said, hey, what if it's one journey, and maybe that's your problem, buddy? And she was right. And that led to the work that I do today, and the kind of the last, 10 years of my life.
Yeah. Well, so often that other people can see what's going on with us before we can see it ourselves.
Yep.
And the same is true, which is why coaches are so amazing, and why so many people, if you're trying to accomplish anything in life, getting a good coach is one of the most important and valuable investments you'll ever make in yourself. Because what I've learned, and I've been a certified life coach since 2004. So I've been in this game a long time as well. And what I've noticed more recently, and when I say recently, I'm talking in the past few years, is that people recognize greatness in others that they may not see in themselves. And that
Yeah.
has been my experience, right? That people recognize certain greatnesses that I have within me. And I'm like, oh, I never really looked at it that way.
Yeah. It's
And it
a,
takes that outsider looking in,
yeah,
you
it's a
know.
funny thing about, there's one of the fundamental concepts, which, I know you're familiar with, but is this concept of projection, right? Like we project onto
Yes.
others. But mostly when we think of that term, we think about projecting negative qualities, right? It's like,
Right.
oh, well, you're projecting. You're criticizing me for that, but that's really true about you. We do it with positive qualities, right? Where we
Absolutely.
project our better selves onto other people, which also can get us into a lot of trouble, right? Because we can put other people on a pedestal and sort of over index on their strength, and maybe they're not who we think they are, right? And maybe that's a quality or a strength that we need to internalize and claim as our own. So I'm with you.
Yeah, for sure. And I know sometimes, like for me, because I'm such a self-help junkie, if you will. And when I see somebody close to me not going after their full potential, I sometimes insert myself and they don't want it, right?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
sometimes people aren't ready for that. They're just, and so you have to learn to meet people where they are, right?
Yep.
Because not
Yeah.
everyone has those same ambitions and desires that I might have. And sometimes I try to push them on other people and they're not ready to hear it, you
Yeah.
know.
You're describing a solid 10 years of my life. So I was definitely there. I made a lot of friends into not friends during that period of time.
I know I've learned to just keep my mouth shut. If people want advice, they'll come to me and they'll ask me. And I'm like,
Right.
otherwise I just don't say a word.
Right. And
Because like,
my advice might not be my advice might be good, but not right for that person. Right. Even maybe it's the
right.
right time, but they just need to hear it from someone else.
Yeah.
And so just the humility to say, hey, maybe you're smart, maybe you have an outside perspective that's helpful, but you may not be the right person. It may not be the right time.
Yeah.
Who knows? And
And I
you could
think,
also be wrong.
right. Well, of course, but I think also with in many more cases than not, it's a whole timing thing that we're just not ready.
Yeah.
Because how often have you heard the same advice maybe presented a little bit differently by so many people, and all of a sudden it just clicks with you, and you're like, ah,
Yep.
now it makes sense to me.
Yep.
Wow.
That's right.
Yeah. So tell me about your book.
So, excuse me, I wrote the book really out of my own experience of uh, a problem that I think we don't talk enough about, or we don't talk at all about, really, which is the psychological reality of authority and its impact on
Okay.
our ability to function. And
Okay.
if I just say some obvious things, everyone will nod their head in agreement, which is like we all had authority figures in our life really early on, parents, teachers, coaches, religious figures, uncles, aunts, people in our world who had authority over us in some form or another because we were not independent, sovereign adults. So they had the ability to control or influence our life in a way that was powerful. And that created conditioning in us. We
Right.
learned how to survive in those environments. It doesn't have to be, could be very traumatic. It could be moderately traumatic, but we all have a ton of experiences with authority figures really early on in our life. And for most people, a lot of those authority experiences were not good
Mm.
in one form or another. Doesn't mean they were abusive directly, doesn't mean they were hostile directly, but uh, most people don't know themselves very well. So whether they're parents or coaches or religious figures or mentors, like most people don't really know themselves as well as they think they do. And so they push
Correct.
their unmet needs, their wants, their fears onto us as children, right? Doesn't make them bad people, doesn't make them evil. It's just how it is. So you fast forward and now we're in the workforce. We're, 23, 25, 45, 65. We're in the workforce with people who have authority more than we do, right? But depending on where you are on the org chart. But we've never outworked the authority relationships of our past. And I know that, and the realization that I had was that I hadn't outworked them. And so through this period of time, up until reading the book, I spent a lot of time and energy trying to outwork some of the authority dynamics from my own life. Whether it was with my parents or mentors or other influential people, and including societal notions of what does it mean to have a boss, be a manager, all those kinds of things. And so the book was my attempt to share some of those experiences and to teach a way of leading teams in the modern world that was attuned to that psychological reality. That's part of what you have to deal with. Just like during COVID, you have to deal with the fact that people are working remotely, or a lot of people are working remotely. Well, you also have to deal with the fact that everybody on your team has authority triggers one way or another. And the people who say they don't are the people you should be most worried about because that means they're the most hidden, right? And so that was really kind of the genesis of the book. And then we taught a methodology for accountability and really how to shift your mindset out of a victim mentality to an ownership mentality. And that's the work we've been doing for the last 10 years at Refound. Work with a lot of high growth companies, some small businesses too, but we're working with folks who are trying to get the people part of leadership right. And it's been a good run, but it's a really complex terrain. There's so many factors going on inside of work, and then when you think about all the things that are happening outside of work, especially these days, it just makes the job of being a leader in the modern world incredibly fraught.
Yes. I love everything you just said, but I want to take a step backwards because I thought of an example in my mind where, there was something that my mother would say to me all the time.
Mm,
And you described it perfectly. She had no intent to give bad advice or whatever. Like, she thought what she was telling me was the best thing, right? Because that's
mm,
all she knew, right? Because we
right.
only know what we know. Can you give so what I'm getting at is I'm curious as to, like, just to make sure in my own mind that I'm understanding you correctly, when you talk about trying to outwork these authority things that were placed upon you when you were a child. Can you just give an example of something that you went through and how you were able to work through that?
Sure. Well, let me just give a little bit of context on that. So, I'm a big believer in, there's many forms of this type of work, but like internal family systems is maybe one of the most commonly known, which is a way of understanding ourselves that we're not just sort of a static, stable identity. We're comprised of multiple identities, right? And this is not pathological, right? Like we have
Right.
a part of us who gets hurt by certain things. We have a part of us who gets angry by certain things that and it doesn't mean that that's like some neglected horrible emotion. It's just part of who we are, right? And so
Right.
so for me, as a kid, one of the things that I internalized, right, was I became kind of a stabilizing voice in my family because my brother was pretty unstable, right? And so I had to take on the role of being an authority in some level way before I should have been, right? So I was a kid and I had to be kind of the voice of reason or a certain way and sort of mediate in kind of inter family dynamics, so to
Mhm.
speak. And so I internalized kind of a notion of of who I was way before I was ready for that level of responsibility. And so the way that translated is like, through my teen years and my 20s and that period of turning a lot of friends into not friends is like I took on way too much authority in some of my relationships because that's what I learned. I learned that that's what I was supposed to be in my family. That was the role that I played, but it wasn't serving me in my adult life. So I had to look and say, wait a second, am I actually the authority in this dynamic? Why do I feel like I need to be? Why do I feel like I need to tell this person what to do? Why do I feel like my perspective matters? Why do I feel like it's my responsibility to try to fix or save this person? And so outworking it is to become aware of saying, hey, there's this tendency, there's this pattern, there's this way that I show up. Is that useful? Is that helpful? Is that who I want to be? Are there good things about that I may want to carry forward? Probably. But are there downsides to that way of being that I want to let go of? Yeah, there definitely are. And so it's that personal inventory. And again, it doesn't have to take 10 years, right? It could take a half an hour of sitting down with a journal and saying, hey, this is something that I learned from my mom. She always used to tell me X. Well, how does that show up in my life, right? Like, oh, these are the situations where I tend to follow her advice, maybe to my detriment. These are types. Oh, here that's the 5 situations where I tend to follow her advice, and it's maybe useful, right? But now you've created some distance between a younger version of you and a way of relating with authority, let's say, or a piece of advice you internalized, and it's not you're not fused to it, right? You're conscious of it, and there's some separation between you as the, so the Buddhists would say as the observer or the witness, right?
Hmm.
So you're able to see yourself and your behavior with some amount of distance, and then you're at choice with what to do with it. So that's the process of outworking, really anything, that dynamic that I just described, but in particular, with respect to to your parents and or other, really influential authority figures in your life.
Love it. That was such a great example. And I liked how you walked through that, because I know for me, like I said, I'll just tell you what I had thought of when you were first saying this was that we had a lot of tragedy growing up, and my mom
Mm,
would always say, just smile and everything will be okay.
mm, yeah,
And so you can imagine what that
yeah,
does,
yeah,
because you end up, you know, pushing everything down, and you just
right,
pretend it doesn't even happen, or you just
right.
smile and you pretend it just never happened. So what
And just on, oh, sorry, finish all your
no, go
thought.
ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I
Go
was
ahead.
gonna, just it's such a tragedy because, and this gets into the, relationship to parenting and all this. Like we somehow learned as a society something that's so destructive, which is that we learned wrongly. It's this terrible information that feeling negative emotions is a negative thing.
Exactly.
I don't know why I don't know who put the pavement on that road first, but it is like devastating to our quest for authenticity. It might be the most devastating thing is when people tell us or we internalize that feeling a negative thing is a negative thing. I
Exactly.
don't know where we got that. We got to get rid of that from our database.
So I tend to think that that comes from, like, with my parents as an example, and I'm a little bit older than you. So I don't know when this mentality stopped over the years, but my parents were raised by parents of the Depression.
Mm,
And so everything was like, eat every single thing on your plate, because, at the time it was, this is back in the 70s. There's starving children in Africa or whatever. You have to
right.
eat every single thing on your plate. And, um, excuse me. And it was just that mentality that we have to just keep drudging forward, don't waste anything. And maybe it came from the fact that because things were so bad during that time of depression, and thankfully we've not experienced a time like that to that degree. um you don't have time to feel negative,
Right.
and you had to just keep pushing forward. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
It could just, yeah.
my grandmother who lived to 100 is exactly that type of person. I mean, she honestly, she was pretty mean about it, but that quality of like, I don't have time for that. Right. And that's
Right.
like, that was really a tragedy. And I think I think we're maturing, right? I think there
Yeah.
is a shift, a broader shift underway of more vulnerability, more curiosity. Doesn't often look like that when you read the paper,
Right.
but I think if you zoom out, there is a shift in consciousness. That's we're I would say we're well into the first inning, right? It's we're not
Yeah.
in the fifth, but it's not like it just started yesterday. But yeah, there's a and it's really subtle, right? It's many layers. Like you and I can sit here
Yeah.
and we can say, well, feeling what we feel is a good thing. What you do with it can be problematic, right? It's
Right.
one thing to say that, but for most people, the ability to give themselves permission to actually do that, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we have to work through. There's a bunch of layers of resistance because it wasn't safe to do that in our families for the most part. And so we've got to convince the parts of us that are still trying to protect us to kind of release their defenses a little bit so we can get into those places. So, that's why this work takes a while.
It does take a while. And I always say, and that's part of the reason why I have this platform, because when you think of happiness solved, it at the very basic level, it's happiness is a choice and the choice is yours.
Mm.
And we have a choice at every second of every day on what thoughts we're going to allow into our consciousness. Having said that, you do have to feel those negative emotions. You have to feel the anger. You have to feel the pain,
Yeah.
right? I know I wasn't allowed to be angry. And then
Mm.
as much as my ex-husband and I, we have such a great relationship today because of his high stressful job, I wasn't allowed to have a bad day when I was married to him.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah, for me, yeah, I was going to say, like when I was a kid, I wasn't
Yeah.
allowed to be anxious
Right.
I was anxious, but I wasn't allowed to be, right? So
Right.
I had to break that family trance, be who I was, like drop to the bottom of that well, let
Right.
myself be anxious, let myself feel all the things that were underneath that I wasn't. It's not, again, it's not intent. My parents are lovely, amazing
Of
people,
course. Of
but
course.
they couldn't create the space that I needed at that time, and so I had to do that for myself, and then you can move on, right?
Well,
But if
and
you
they
don't,
didn't
yeah,
know that. They
no,
didn't know what they didn't know because when my brother died 2 weeks before I turned 13 years old, that's a
mm,
very traumatic thing for a child. In today's world, the schools, the counselors would be calling them in. Do you need help? What can we do to support you? I had nothing,
right,
nothing.
I
You
know,
just didn't talk about it. So for me as a child, 12 going on 13 years old, it was like, oh, okay. So it just smile, like that's when it started. Just smile and everything will be okay. Like it was
right,
dismissive, like it didn't matter. And it did
right,
matter. It was a major ordeal. And they didn't know. But going to a therapist or God forbid, a psychiatrist, I mean, that was
right,
just
right,
it was just no, you did not. There was such a stigma
yeah,
around even talking to somebody about your mental health. It was so different then. And I know we're making progress today, thankfully, right? We're making
mm-hmm,
progress and making it more, less of a stigma that depression is a real thing and mental illness is a real thing. And we need to talk about these things that happen in our lives so that we can get to the point because things happen to us. And this circles back to getting people out of that victim mentality, right?
yeah,
Yes, things happen to us. When my brother died, that happened to me, right?
yeah,
I didn't ask for it, it happened.
yeah,
Now, what I do with it after is what you were talking about. And it took me many, many years and hitting rock bottom from drug abuse because I never dealt with that grief to realize that that happened for me
right,
and not to me. And
yep,
that's the hardest part is feeling because things do, they're real, they happen to you. But you have to, in order to get out of that victim mentality, you have to reach a point where you realize that it happens for you, not to you. So
yeah.
what other thoughts can you share on that? Because we're almost out of time here. But what other thoughts? Because that's such a big thing, that victim mentality that people go through.
Well, I want to offer a best practice, or at least a thing that if I could wave a magic wand and change one thing with how parents show up, it would be because on the playgrounds of our lives, I have two kids. One of them is off to college, another one's in first grade.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so I kind of got a spectrum there, but I
Yes.
see parents doing this thing that I just wish I could just delete, which is in some form or another, they tell their kids either verbally or through their body or through their expression, they tell kids, don't feel the thing that you're feeling right now. Like if we could just stop doing that, like just stop telling kids not to feel what they're feeling.
Right.
Work on yourself. Like that's your trigger, not theirs. They're
That's
fine.
right.
They're just feeling what they're feeling. It's all about you. It's all narcissism for because you're uncomfortable with what they're actually fine. Kids are amazing, emotional, facile beings. Just let them be that. So if we could just delete that from our lexicon as parents, the world would be a better place.
I love it because it is. It's so true. And my son has anxiety, and and even to this day, there's times when he'll call me, and I'm like, all right, let's feel it, let's breathe, and
Yep.
and I walk him through the deep breathing, and you can hear the shift in his voice because he's off in college, and so most of our communication is over the phone, but you can hear um, that he's processing it, and then he'll start to okay.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's anxiety is really just fear. It's
Yep.
fear. You're afraid of
Yep.
something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the fear is always going to be there. So this has been such an amazing conversation. And I didn't expect us to take it where it went. And I'm so glad because I always feel like whatever conversation shows up, it's absolutely perfect.
Mm.
Um, how can people reach you and learn more about what you do? And then is there any closing words that you would like to share with the audience today?
First of all, thanks for having me on the show. I love an organic conversation that goes wherever it goes. Um, so refound.com, like rebound, but with an F, is my company. We do leadership development. That's where you can find me. You can reach out to hello@refound.com and that will make its way to my inbox.
Perfect.
Um, and I'm happy to answer any questions or talk at all about, that or this topic. And just in terms of closing thoughts, I just think that the biggest problem that we face right now is how do we trust the information that we're getting out there? And
Yes.
there are so many options. There's such a buffet of information on every topic. And the thing that has benefited me in my life in various domains is to step away from the buffet, pick pick a pick an angle and take that angle down to its destination. So if it's in health, if it's in wellness, if it's in psychology, relationships, spirituality, medicine, politics, like find one trusted source and follow their recommendations and try it and see, and just step away from the buffet. Because if you just are consuming little bits of superficial information from a bunch of different people, which is the easiest thing to do these days, you won't see the benefits of what they're actually pointing towards.
Mm. Excellent advice, because I realized that earlier this year that I was like, ooh, like shiny object syndrome. Ooh, that sounds good. Ooh, because we're so inundated. When I started on my journey 34 years ago, you had to go and buy a book and read it,
Right.
and okay. And then I read my book.
Right.
I absorbed the information. Now it's just like, it's just coming at us. So
Overload.
that's really great advice. Total overload. Total overload. So you said hello@refound.com.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how to reach you over email. And
Yep.
and
I
we'll
don't do
have
much on social otherwise. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn in the kind of the professional sphere, but I'm a little bit old school that way. But I answer all my emails personally. So there's that.
perfect. Awesome. And we'll make sure all the links are in the show notes as well. Jonathan
Great.
Raymond, thank you so much for joining me today. And everybody who's listening, I hope you got something out of that. I love that. Just learn that things happen for you, not to you, and just get out of that victim mentality and feel those feelings, right? It's so
Yep.
important.
Indeed.
All
Thanks so
right.
much.
Thank you. I hope you